So let me briefly touch on how, if you have these projections that you want to make, you want to, you start from a baseline, you build an alternative, you want to build in some basic intuition, basic notions of supply and demand. And if you can tell that story that you found, that I emphasized last week, you can make a request to CBO or JCT and they can bring more computational firepower to fulfilling a request. The point, though, will be that everything is built on supply and demand. Everything over the course of all of economics comes back to supply and demand. Supply and demand, though, starts from this notion of choice. At the most simple level, economics is the study of choices. So if you have a choice between two decisions, and you can only pick one, a way for us that you assign value to the decision that you chose is, you know, it must be at least as good as whatever you gave up to get it. That's the notion of opportunity cost. Have y'all encountered opportunity cost before? Okay. So that fundamentally, every policy that gets modeled comes down to the choice that your constituents are facing when they think, when I go to the grocery store, do I buy hamburgers or do I buy hot dogs? The money I spend on hamburgers can't also be spent on hot dogs, so I have to make a choice. Do I want more hamburgers or more hot dogs? And even then, it's a question of how many hamburgers to buy, how many hot dogs. Those decisions can all be reduced down to, like, okay, if I've got 3 hamburgers in my cart, do I want to buy a 4th? It comes back to this idea of thinking through at the margin. You have this decision, it's an either or. And all that you're doing as an economist is figuring out, how do you rapidly iterate on these binary decisions, these marginal decisions, to build up supply and demand. And the way to think about it is that when you go to the grocery store and you want to buy hamburgers, there's a price there. The question that is put before you is, this is the price that the store is charging. It's $5 for a pound of ground beef. Do I want to buy 1 pound? Do I want to buy 2 pounds? How much? If the price were $4, maybe I would like to buy a little bit more. And so you can trace for every potential price that the store could offer, you would be able to answer, how much do you want to buy? The gist being that when you're buying, the lower the price, the more you want to buy. So you get this downward sloping demand curve. Conversely, as a seller, when someone is offering you higher prices, you are more willing to provide. So you think about when the snow was coming in town, you go look for ice melts, you go look for snow plows, snow shovels, generators. There was a pinch, and so stores could have raised their prices. And what that does is it provides an incentive to say, oh, wow, this snow equipment is really needed here, and people figure out, hey, how do I direct those goods and services to where they're needed most? As the price goes up, they become more willing to supply those goods and services. So when you put the two together, you realize that they cross. When the price is very high, you get lots of people willing to sell, not much interest in buying. When the price is too low, you get lots of people who'd like to buy, but not too many people that are able to sell. And somewhere in the middle is the equilibrium price, the price that sets the quantity demanded equal to the quantity supplied. So every model is trying to chase what is happening to this equilibrium. If you're walking through at a basic level, just simply understanding supply and demand, being able to shift supply and demand, being able to know which direction the equilibrium price and quantity move, gets you ahead of 99% of people. What's happening at CBO and JCT is that they're going to start representing the supply and demand curves with equations. And so graphically, you can go back to algebra where you would draw an equation for a line, and you would have these different components. There's the intercept that says when the x-axis is 0, where does that line cross the y-axis? And if I change this, no matter what the x value is, if I shift the intercept, then it shifts the entire line up or down. And then there's the slope, which basically says for every unit of X, how much does the Y change? For every dollar that the price is increased, how much does that shift my willingness to buy? For something like gasoline, like heating, the price can go up a lot, and I'm not going to change how much I want to buy because those are necessities. Luxuries, I might be more willing to substitute away from those. So everything that's in a model comes down to either something that is an endogenous variable. So if you're thinking about how to model the price and the quantity, you have a set of equations that you are solving for those things that are determined within the model. But then there are certain things that are outside of the model, which is often policy. Fiscal policy variables like what are tax rates, how much is spent on a given government program. Those are all things that shift the curves. And then you have parameters, so the internal valuation that people may assign to those goods, their willingness to substitute, their willingness to change their behaviors is something that you also need to capture. And if you want to understand the effect of a policy, but you're not taking into account the target population who is affected by it, you're not necessarily going to get the correct answer. So you need all three of those components specified when you make a request so that you know that you can anticipate what kind of a response you're going to get back from CBO or JCT. So either beforehand as you're thinking about crafting a request, or after CBO and JCT have given you an analysis and you want to check and think critically, should I trust this analysis? Can I believe the estimates? This is a set of questions that you should run through. You should check what model was used. I walked through some examples of the different types of models that they have. Compared it to the blind man and the elephant. Each model is going to specify, it's going to account for certain issues better than others. If you have a policy and you really want to emphasize the benefits of economic growth that come out of that policy, you need to make sure that they're using a dynamic model that accounts for economic growth. Just check and make sure that they've gone about it in the right way. If you have a policy and you want to make sure that it's representing the poorest constituents out there, make sure that it's giving you a distributional analysis where they're taking into account the fact of the differences across the population. Think through what are the simplifying assumptions that go into that model. They will try to cover this up in footnotes. You can look for weasel words. Basically, what you want is a sense where there may be some hand waving, or the analysis is directed quickly towards a conclusion to say, okay, why did you make that assumption? This is the fine art of model building. You can't include every level of detail. These are choices that are made that represent the judgment of the modeler, which is an opinion. It's a taste. You can question that and say, I think this is really important to my story. Your assumption is driving too much of the results. I'd like to drill down on this and make sure that the story we want to tell is captured within the model. Make sure that is applied within the exogenous variables. That if you have a policy that is affecting supply or demand in a certain way, make sure that it's captured in shifting supply and demand in the right way. Check for the parameter values. This is a very common one in things like the elasticity of labor supply. So that measures whenever there's a change in the tax rate. Does that mean that people, if there's a huge cut to income taxes, do people work more or less? Do they work a lot more or a little bit more? That estimate is derived often from economic literature, and within the literature there might be a debate about that. CBO or JCT might pick a more prominent value or more central value, but if the literature hasn't narrowed that down to a consensus, then you could possibly ask about, either characterizing the uncertainty around that or using different parameter values, changing their assumptions. You could ask them to change their assumptions in line with other parts of the literature if you can find another paper that cites a value that you find is more credible. And the last one is the certainty. So a lot of these parameter values or shifts come with a standard of error. Nothing is known for sure. You have the big data set and you try to find the parameter values that fit it as well as possible, but you're never going to pin it down exactly. And often when you're making forecasts about the future. You don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future. So even those projections will account for some uncertainty about future events. And it could be helpful just to pin down and say, can you give me a high case or a low case on this parameter value? So you get a sense of, are your projections sensitive to that parameter value? Or how are the forecasts sensitive to what might happen in the future? Is there big volatility or is there small volatility? That's additional information that helps you put the point estimate in context.